I believe that we have been hearing about the North Korea nuclear crisis for a while, and oftentimes we are asked to speak about Korean history, and I think this mic is easy to write.
It's good.
No? Yeah, it's good. I see the echo. And it's really hard to make it to talk about the entire Korean history. So I thought that I just pick a little bit of an earlier Korean history that you may not have heard. I'm positively sure you have heard as a related peace activist about recent U.S. interventions and aggressions in East Asia or Asia Pacific. And a lot of people think that the beginning of this conflict lies in a Korean War, or U.S.'s attempt to block Russia or Soviet Union at the time, as it was known, or China currently. I think it is largely true, but the war, Korean War, many people know it's the conflict between North Korea and South Korea, and U.S. as a benefactor or a friend went in to protect South Korea is what they think, they like to think. Is that really true is the question that I and many Korean American activists or Korean progressive movement people are having. U.S. has always worked on pursuing its own interest, mostly as a state or a spokesperson of a capitalist, or large corporations or military-industrial complex, that U.S. is only seeking its interest. If we always keep that in mind when it's dealing with the foreign policies, then I think it is a little bit much clearer. Anyway, the war is between North Korea and U.S. And a lot of times we have to see why is North Korea always making threats against the U.S., not against South Korea. And they are trying to build a peace treaty or peace negotiations with the U.S. Is that because U.S. is the most powerful country? Or is it because U.S. was a party to the South Korean War? Or is it because the U.S. is the only country that has made a direct threat to the very existence of North Korea? I'm not sure if you realize, but U.S. has been trying to put pressure to South Korea to build a trilateral alliances, right? Korea, South Korea, Japan, and U.S. They wanted to build a trilateral military alliances. I'm not sure if you have been following, but South Koreans are really mad about that. Because, as you know, South Korea was a colony of Japan for 36 years. Decolonization process, legal or compensation process did not happen so much because of the U.S. actually. U.S. stopped it, and U.S., when they were trying to stabilize the region, they thought that if Japanese collaborators were in power, it would be much easier for them to work with, rather than speaking to these people who does not know or who's more leaning towards the socialism at the time. Why isn't Korea to be entrusted with its own control over its own military? Why does U.S. still have to retain in 2018, currently at this time, Koreans cannot have a wartime control? Is this an equal partner because it's an equal partner, or is it because Korea is so important to the U.S.? U.S. does not want to give it to South Korea?
I don't understand why North Korea would be demanded to give up its nuclear weapons, even unconditionally or in any other circumstance, when we Americans are placing a THAAD missile directed at them. So what would their motivation be to give up anything? It sounds like it's a no-win situation. Can't be won, because U.S. is not going to remove the THAAD missile. So why would North Korea be moved in any way to destroy their own defense?
That's true.
I think that THAAD missile is a missile defense system. Maybe you can say a little bit more about the THAAD, as why it is, although it's called a defense system, it really is an offense, part of an offensive program.
Well, similar to what happened during the Cold War, there's this notion of a balance of forces. If one side believes that if they attack the other side, they'll be destroyed, they're less likely to attack. But if you think of it sort of like as a sword and a shield, if you have a shield and you think you can keep the other country from attacking you, you are therefore more able to threaten a first strike. So since both sides have nuclear weapons, were the THAAD system to be capable of knocking out the North Korean nukes, then they would feel more vulnerable. And it's not really clear that this thing works or not, but the point is militaries think in worst case scenarios. So they assume, well, what if it did work? Then they could block our nuclear capability and they could attack us with impunity, and therefore the only way around that is for us to have more nuclear weapons, and that's how arms races spiral upward. That's why the U.S. and the Soviet Union in the 70s had the anti-ballistic missile treaty, because they said, all right, these defensive systems back and forth are just forcing us to build more and more and more nuclear weapons, and if we put a lid on that, then maybe we can actually stop that upward growth of nukes and start bringing it down again. So I think it's a difficult concept, because most people are, well, it's defensive, how bad could it be? But it's the context in which it's being used that's the problem.
So in Korea, they say that it supports the U.S.'s first strike. So let's say, think about that. If the U.S. attacks first, then if they had a missile, let's say, just for the sake of argument, it's China. The U.S. shoots the missile to the China. China retaliates. Then our missile defense system will be able to block their missiles coming in. So it allows us to be able to attack first or do the first strike without worrying about retaliation. It gives us an upper superior position. So that's why U.S. missile defense is actually a very offensive system. And that's what U.S. wants South Korea to be part of. So that because we are closer to the China. And then that is not, I'm not sure about that, but in Korea they are saying that, THAAD system is terminal. So terminal is when the missile gets launched, this is a terminal stage when it's coming down.
So it's at full speed.
Right, it's full speed and it's coming in. And that's when, from South Korea to be able to terminally hit, has to be further away. It's further away. South Korea and North Korea is, it's a size of, it's a size close to North Carolina maybe? Or like 1.2 times over Maine. So it's a small country, so within that, South Korea and North Korea, they don't even have to use the it's just a Scud missile would be able to just be fine. It's not about North Korea, it's about China. Or missiles that is going to across the Pacific to the US. And that's what South Korea is saying, that why the South has to be in Korean soil.
Well, and the lives of South Koreans are the ones that are being put at risk. So they're being drawn into this nuclear confrontation. in a way that puts them at more risk than even citizens here are.
I want to make sure I understood this. Bill, are you saying that the only reason the U.S. is doing this is for military-industrial complex people to get rich, or is there some other reason that they think? And then the other part of my question, I think you've given us a good sense of what's happening in South Korea and in the U.S., but I'm still I hardly know anything about North Korea. And I think a lot of people in the U.S. accept the argument that there's no military solution and it would be really dangerous to have a war there, either a conventional or a nuclear war. But the other part of it is I think there's been so much description in the news about how crazy Kim is and how out of control. What I would like to know is a little more about North Korea and about him. Like, is he really dangerous? Is he as much of an egotist and dictator as they say? And what is the economic situation in North Korea? Are people really poor? Like, are these blockades working? Or is China doing enough trade so people are kind of, not that poor? I want to know more about North Korea.
Yeah, I don't think it's just about the military-industrial complex, but I think what they do is there's tensions in the world that exist. They tend to heighten them in terms of the way they're fed back to the public. And then that heightened level of fear is able to fuel higher Pentagon budgets. But, Kim Jong-un is really a real potential threat. I mean, there are nuclear weapons in China, in Russia. There's all kinds of security problems like terrorism and so forth. And the US government has a very militarized view of how to solve those problems, which has been a disaster throughout this century. If you look at the results of the Iraq War and the Afghan War and now the 7 wars that the United States is fighting at least around the world. So I think there is kind of like a strategic or ideological aspect that says, the way to defend the United States is what they call it forward deployment. We have to be, it was like during the Iraq War, they said, well, we have to kill them over there so they don't come here. But of course they weren't over there until we went there, because they tried to make that link with Al-Qaeda, and that link did not exist between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. But once the US became an occupying power, then jihadist groups came in to help the resistance in Iraq. And there was an Al-Qaeda in Iraq after the US occupation, which then morphed into ISIS. So their thrust, even if you take them, assume it was an honest effort to defend the United States, it backfired disastrously. But I think there is a lot of thinking in the nuclear priesthood inside the Pentagon and amongst the generals, and kind of a long history of that the way to defend the United States is to have this global military presence. So I think some of that is not just about padding the military-industrial complex, it's just kind of this Cold War mindset that they haven't been able to let go of.
The military-industrial complex is a big part of it too. Korea spends about $800 million in buying those weapons and that US designated to buy, not the ones that they want to buy. South Korea for a long time, up to I think last year or the year before, up to last year or until even now, they are not supposed to have their own missile program that goes longer than 5 kilometers or something like that. There is a limitations that South Korean militaries have that US imposes on what kind of weapons they can buy and what kinds of weapons they cannot possess. But also that presence of the US military, I think, provides the sense of security for the US corporations to go in. So there's a GM, there's a Microsoft, or these companies that goes into build a factory, they like to go to the places where US is an occupying forces. So in 1994, there was a lot of, at the brink of war, right, because of the nuclear crisis and all that thing was happening, that a lot of US companies left South Korea. They were trying to save, be out of the conflict zone. So that's another thing. when you always, as I think Bill also mentioned at the beginning, when there is a war and there is an enemy out there that is threatening you, it's much easier to control the people and direct people's problems projected onto something else out there. They are having much more problems than us. You cannot complain about this type of thing is happening. That had happened in South Korea, and I'm sure to a lot of degrees it may be happening in North Korea. So when there's a peacetime, we are giving it the more power to the people to be able to resolve it by themselves. And that's all North Koreans are asking, is leave us alone. And we'll handle our problems. So when I went to North Korea, it was 2002. And they were just coming out of the famine, quote unquote famine, right? Because of all this lack of food. And no one talked about, whenever we asked questions about famine or the meal, no one talked about it. They said, oh, it's a thing of the past. We are fine, we are okay. By 2008, people talked about the famine. Because I think by then they felt like they are doing much better. They are not dying anymore. So they talked about the food issues. Back then, we really didn't have much to eat. We had to go and cut so much trees, and then with the trees, the bark of the tree, how to make the porridge. Like there was this instructions come out from the top to the bottom, and people only ate like 1 meal a day, and then tried to just live. They are still poor. Another example is one of my group went to Baekdusan Hotel, and there was a 2-star hotel, and then they said that they don't have a room. And then I was like, but there's no guests in this hotel. How come there's no room? And so then they were like, how many rooms do you need? You need 6 rooms. We only have 5. So I said, in this big hotel, it was a really big hotel. Why? Because they didn't have toilet seats. The blockade, I don't know why the toilet seats are luxurious goods, but it was blockaded. So then, this hotel did not have a toilet seats. So then they didn't want to show it to the foreigners, the toilets that without the toilet cover. So they were saying the room's not available. So we had to talk a long time, so that the people who are in the tour guide will be using it. Don't worry about it. We're not gonna say anything. So we used it. So when one of our member was a little bit big, and she sat on it, and then it broke. The devastation the management had, and they were like, it's not supplied anymore, So then that's when we finally felt. Oh. But then we were like, but didn't they say something about the military related, the security related? It's not something of a people's daily goods. And then they said it's categorized as a luxurious goods. And that only the Kim family or the yacht, they talk about the yacht, and they never talked about the toilet seats. So they are in every day they are being felt, and it's not it's a poor country. It is not rich country, but people live in the poor countries happily too. It's just the daily ways. We went to we went to Sariwon, one of closer. It's not to the city. It's a town. It's a rural area. We went to town, and then we were just trying to get together with the farmers. And then one of the older lady was talking to me like, I don't know what the world is coming to. Like nowadays, on the streets, you know, the boys and girls, they're holding hands and walking together. And I was like, holding hands is a very natural way of, you know, getting together, no? They're like, when I was young, that was not even possible. So I said, when was that, hundreds of years ago? I mean, like, people are really funny. They really enjoy singing and dancing. I'm not sure if you saw the opening ceremony and the special concert that North Koreans had in South Korea, in Seoul. They are really wearing the fancy day dance. In a factory, everyone is obligated, quote unquote, obligated to do this post-lunch exercise. And there was what my delegation called it as a sexy dance. Because it was a kind of move, you know. For 20 minutes, they all do the exercise and then they go in. There is definitely a collective culture. There may be, I'm not sure, I don't live there. So there are things that I observe and there are things that, you know, I cannot even see. But there's a lot of laughter, people joke around. They work really hard. There are not much of gas, so there is a bus, but people are walking. There's a tractor, but it's not moving. They use the cows to till the land, but they make it do. You know, there are a lot of inventions that they made. They even make a fabric out of coal, because there's no way that they can import the cottons anymore. So then they had to make a do, and they are trying to be with Juche, the self-reliance. You know, if the blockade is not going away, then they have to make ways to be able to live and provide for people. So a lot of emphasis on the science, a lot of emphasis on, you know, trying to make ends. The people, not only, I never met Kim Jong-un personally. I don't think I will ever, but, you know, I'm sure there are corruptions within officers. But the first thing they always talk about is the people, the masses. How do we serve the masses? You know, it's an interesting combination of various aspects. But I want to say that, you know, if we leave them alone, if all the superpowers around, the Russians, Chinese, Japan, US, everyone leave them alone, they will find their ways to develop their own and then change their own country for the better. And they are very proud and confident people, you know. One of the songs that they in South Korea they sing is it's a Gwangju song, and they said it that, you know, without love, without honor. People always promise that we will be pursuing one goal. For that one goal, we'll strive. And that's for the betterment of our lives. You know? And for South Koreans, it was a song for the democracy. So for the democracy that you die. And if I die, you place you keep my position alive. You know? Even if I die, I'll follow you in my spirit. And this type of the pursuance of democracy and freedom and, you know, just life. Are we alive? How do we know we are alive? Because we strive for something, we work for something. And that's, you know, the goal of North Korea is just to survive. Survive and make it better.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, certainly Kim Jong-un's a dictator. He has serious human rights issues. But the idea that he's crazy, I think, is a myth. I mean, he knows what he wants. He's got a plan to maintain control of the country. And therefore, he's not going to risk his position by lashing out and attacking the United States, for example. So I think I mean, the U.S. negotiated with Stalin. Stalin was not a nice person. So it's, I think there's kind of two issues. One is, she talked about the resilience of the people in North Korea. And as long as he's under military threat and he's under economic embargo, it's actually easier for him to hold power because he can point to the foreign enemy, and it's harder for people to push back against what he's doing in the country. So, I think the idea that he's unpredictable and crazy, it clouds the issue. The fact that he's a dictator, he's got human rights abuses, is not a reason to start World War III. So it's, that's kind of the difference. And I think in some of the popular understanding or some of the slant to the information we get, it's somehow those are confused. He's this crazy guy, he's like the equivalent of a suicide bomber, he doesn't care about himself, and he's going to attack us just to show he can do it. I don't think that's the case. And that's sort of what William Perry was saying. The guy's not suicidal. You can make a deal with him if you agree that you're not going to basically threaten to kill him. And very few people would make a deal under those circumstances. So it doesn't change the fact that he's got serious problems, he's a dictator, he's a problem for the people of North Korea, but as was pointed out, if there wasn't so much interference within the country, I think North and South could work out an arrangement that would eventually lead towards peace.